Michelle Marie McGrath.
Welcome, and today I'm thrilled to be connecting with Christine Erickson. Christine believes in reflective learning through connecting with nature and works with horses as teaching partners for executive education and individual development and healing. She's the founder of One Legacy Coaching, LLC, and the Mother Within initiative. She has facilitated learning programs for incredibly diverse individuals, executive leadership teams, and social businesses internationally. As a coach and entrepreneur, she enjoys working with clients who want to practice and embody intentional and creative living, self-leadership that inspires, and the heart space to serve others. It is her intention to connect with and serve other women through the Mother Within initiative in order to create an expressive and representative space for women without children and to bridge social and cultural conversations that ultimately affect all women. Amen. And you can find Christine at onelegacycoaching.com. Hi, Christine. So happy to be speaking to you today.
Likewise, Michelle.
And I'm really interested to hear your take on this situation. And, so just to start us off, could you please share a little bit about whether you've not had a child due to personal choice or through circumstances?
I will, and I always find the language interesting.
Yeah.
I would, to start with, I would define myself as not having a child by circumstance, and yet acknowledge that we have a choice in circumstances. However, the way that we define child-free today or by choice, I wouldn't fit that category in that I didn't have an outright decision to never have a child or not want to have a child. So my circumstance, my initial circumstance came through my marriage, and where when I did get married later, I did assume that I would have children. I intended to have children. However, that was not a healthy relationship. And actually, the consideration of having a child or bringing a child into that environment is what moved me out of it.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And so was that something that, so you say you just had assumed that you would have a child, but then obviously through those circumstances, it wasn't the right thing. And what did that bring up for you to explore? Was it at a certain point in your life where you thought, okay, maybe this is not going to be an option for me? Yeah. Was it a sudden realization or a gradual thing?
No, I think it was it was definitely gradual in that by the time I got divorced, I was really did not leave or got divorced with the notion that I will never have a child. It was just that I knew I needed to leave that relationship. But, the time that it took, the healing that it took, shifted that because I was changing, I was aging, and by the time I was in another serious relationship, the circumstances were different. I was with somebody who had children, who did not want any more children, and I was in my 40s now. So again, a circumstantial situation, but it was in that really that I had to come to terms with this is not going to happen.
Yeah, and so was it a case of that, you felt like you were happy in the relationship, and so then, you had to come to terms with the fact that having a child together was not going to happen? Yeah,
and it was a dance because that wasn't always clear from the beginning of the relationship. So there were a lot of dynamics involved, in coming to a point of, I suppose there's a choice point, of on choosing the cycle of the same pain and making a decision to move forward with what is.
Yeah, because that can be difficult, can't it? Especially if you come to your early 40s, because I know that I've spoken to women who they've thought they really, really want a child and they're at that age group and the other person doesn't, or like you say, they've already got children, and then they're kind of stuck in this situation where they're thinking, okay, is this the person I really want to be with more than I really want a child? whether I do that on my own or whether I take a chance that I'm going to meet somebody that would be suitable to have that experience with. I mean, it's all, who knows, you know.
Yeah, it brings a whole new dynamic of questioning, you know, of the self and the other.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of things. I mean, the whole gamut I questioned. I questioned my relationship. I questioned myself. All of those things, you know, and then the line about where to accept what is, or to force something. Well, you know, when is it a choice to create something, and when is it forcing something, and you know, all of those really kind of sensitive dynamics come into play.
I mean, we can drive ourselves crazy with the analysis of that, can't we? In overthinking these things, because sometimes
absolutely.
you just don't know.
Yeah. It's a deep vacillation. I mean, it's a really deep and sensitive life choice, and that vacillation is the pain spot. You know, it's a really deep pain, and how to step out of that, I think, is a part of the moving forward once you're in an awareness that you're not going to have a child.
And so what was it that helped you move forward with that, Christine? Were there any specific processes or tools that you found, you know, helped you feel clearer?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I did, and really where the Mother Within came from for me, was getting really quiet and observing that pain and that vacillating process. And I just thought, my gosh, how long can I hold this? How long can I recycle these questions, this pain? How do I stop it? How do I shift it? And using, yes, a lot of coaching tools and thought work, but it was really getting quiet and allowing myself to feel about it.
Yeah.
And I think that I had stopped myself up to a certain point so often. I had grieved, I had cried, but stopped, and because I thought there was going to be this floodgate that would not quit.
Yeah.
And what happened instead is I was filled with this enormous love, and it took me by surprise. And it was so beautiful, and I realized that this is the mother in me. That's who I am. I am a maternal being. It shows up in my relationships, in my everyday practices. It is a big part of who I am. And so trying to set her aside with the not having a child was a bigger pain.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of that healing process for me. Really accepting that and owning it, and reintegrating myself, if you will, in that way.
And I think what you say is so important, that often we don't give ourselves permission to always feel fully all of the emotions that are there, because we're scared that we'll be overwhelmed by it. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I wasn't trying to reach that space of love or feel good. And so it took me by beautiful surprise, and really started shifting from there. And that, you know, and it is a constant dance. I think that there's a really deep knowing and familiarity or recognition, you know, of a maternal sense, that it doesn't mean I don't feel about things, or I don't have moments of, oh, wow, or what if, but not in that agonizing way.
Yeah.
It's just a touch point. You know, and I think that will be there throughout my life in different stages, because I identify with that. I identify with beautiful moments with a child, or between a mother and a child, very naturally. So.
And what were like some of the things that you experienced with your family and friends through this? Did you feel supported, or did you feel, you know, that they didn't really understand like what you were going through?
Yeah, I felt I didn't feel particularly supported, and that's because I wasn't particularly open about it. I didn't have that direct pressure from family and friends around having a child. What I experienced more was just a silence about it.
Right.
And so then when it came to this point of me realizing, wow, this really is not going to happen, I took it even deeper inside for a long time. What has shifted in that regard with family or friends is my comfort in responding to things as opposed to either appeasing people or dancing around it. Now I'm much more clear. Not only on my story and my path, but how I feel about things. And I think when you can offer that to somebody, it opens a gateway for different communication.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Like that this is still such an awkward and taboo topic. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's something that can be very personal and very emotive, but like you, in talking to women who are, going through these experiences, whether it is through circumstance or choice or a combination of that, which is what most seem to be actually, it's funny the degree of uncomfortable feelings in that we don't always feel able to speak about it openly, especially with friends who are mothers, for example, or if that's something that, they've always been 100% clear about, that that's what they want, and then that's what's happened, and there hasn't been any problem with that. There can be this almost incomprehension, I've found, in really understanding some of the subtleties of the problems or the confusion around it. It's really fascinating. So one thing I've noticed, Christine, in the last sort of, particularly the last few months or the last year that I've been having these conversations is it's interesting the level of awkwardness in talking about it, especially with friends who, may have been completely clear they wanted kids and that's happened for them and there's not been any issue and it's all kind of unfolded. I find that there's sometimes that sort of lack of comprehension almost. And I was even talking to somebody the other day and she just said, I don't really get it. I just never even considered that I wouldn't have children. It wasn't really something I questioned. So I find this really interesting. And I said, yeah, but, that's how we're conditioned in our society, that a lot of the time we do just assume that it's going to be a central part of our lives. But really, until you're trying, or depending on the situation you're in with a relationship, we don't know that that's going to be the case.
Right, absolutely. And I think what I find so flooring is that given the numbers of women without children, let alone men without children, that this isn't a more open conversation.
Yeah.
A more visible conversation. We're a significant part of the population.
Yes.
So, yeah, I just think, wow, well, when is this, demographic going to be acknowledged, or how does it become acknowledged? And it seems that it's up to us.
Yeah, and I know I was reading a book the other week, and it was saying that in the States, for example, I think it's just over 50% of women of a childbearing age don't have children.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is massive, When
I think about it from, and that's from, I believe, age 17 or through early 40s. And what I found fascinating the first time I read that was I started to think about it from a business perspective or even a marketing perspective, which maybe sounds kind of crude. But I thought, my gosh, the things that we are inundated with on a daily basis, from Hollywood baby bumps to miracle babies and things that are not realistic, hopeful statistics for people, but that are in our face. And I think half the female, and that's just the female population in the U.S., again, not including males, so it's much larger, is not even relevant to them.
Totally.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you can see One thing that I wrote about was when you look at things systemically, beyond even the social piece of it, but taxation and different regulations that want to feed as the birth rate goes down, want to encourage people to have more children, women to have more children, or the marriage rate goes down to increase marriage rates. There's an old paradigm at work here that is very intentionally scrambling to shift that, as opposed to looking at what we are and who we are right now.
That's right.
Which is very frightening.
It is. And just if you think even of, like, we're talking about the figures, how, the number of women aged 40 and over without children, how that figure's doubled in the last 10 years. And it's only going to increase. And obviously we're a rapidly aging population as well. Mm-hmm. So, there's going to be increasing number of people aging that don't have children, that are not sort of continuing on their lineage in that way. So we really need to look at different paradigms and creating those, and sort of having much more open conversations on the topic. Mm-hmm. And so, Christine, the work that you do, which I find fascinating, the work that you're doing with horses and the Mother Within, how does that work? Like, how do you work with women in this way with the horses? What's that all about? I'm fascinated to hear about that.
Yeah, I deeply honor the powerful work that we do as coaches and other healing professionals. And this is the work with the horses is such a beautiful integration of that, that really allows people to quite immediately move out of more of that verbal mind space and drop back into their body sensing and knowing in a very safe and non-judgmental space with horses. Horses are so clean, their energy is so clean and so present that it draws us into that. And so what comes up for us, or what we're working with, and the response and communication with the horse, is just this completely beautiful, pure, honest, authentic exchange that we can learn from, we can observe, we can shift our thoughts, our patterns from. And the amount of time that would take, even in a beautiful coaching conversation, would evolve over a much longer time.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it, that shift that is coming from that really deep body sensing, so that we can allow our minds to fathom things, to release our energy in a very different way, and even understand our energy around living through this.
And do people move through a lot of fears in that work? Because I could imagine that, I know I've only ever had one situation with a horse where I was really excited to have a lesson and all that, and then I had a really bad experience, which really disappointed me, because I'd actually had no fears around it previously, but then it almost brought them up, and I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again. Maybe that's not for me. And so I've always thought, what a shame, like, that experience was, and that I'd really like to, do something. It's been one of those things in the back of my mind that I'd like to have a different experience. So I find this really fascinating.
Yeah. And I love that example, because that's a great example of energy, right?
Yeah.
That you were excited, anticipating, and so you had a lot of energy. And so the response to that is just like, wow, there's a lot of energy here right now. I don't know what that means yet, So it wasn't a bad thing. It was just a response to that beautiful big energy.
Yeah.
And so how to distill those things and recognize and really interpret in a way that is authentic, It's not negative, it's just information. But when you're doing that outside of the context of this type of work, it can become a really damaging experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the people that I was with, they didn't handle it well at all. Like, and instead of encouraging me to get back on and do, they sort of, they just said, like, oh, we have 6-year-olds who do this. And I just thought, like, that's really not the thing to say.
No. No. So yeah, that's not what it was.
Yeah, so I find this really sort of fascinating in that I could imagine as well that just due to the sheer size of horses and kind of animals of that level that could make people feel a bit nervous or anxious as well.
Absolutely. I've worked with, the beautiful thing about working with horses is everybody has a horse story. Whether it's, I rode one once and she drove me through the barn and I almost fell off, or on my drive from work or my walk, there's a horse in this pasture, or when I was a child, there's always a horse story. And I love that. But oftentimes it's what you described, or maybe it's a traumatic injury from somebody who is a professional rider. I've worked with all kinds of people who are extremely afraid of horses and very courageous to come to the work for what it can provide. And those fears are alleviated, I can assure you. That is such a beautiful process to, I feel very privileged to be able to facilitate it and to witness it. Because that learning process alone and what someone gets to allow and let go of and explore with themselves speaks to, the saying of how we do one thing is how we do that in other domains in our life.
Yeah.
And so, holding fear in that one space or that one incident, then leads to other conversations and learning and really profound experience. I mean, people who, in the morning will stay on the, as far away as they can. And by the afternoon, are kissing the horse, or in the next half hour. I've seen it so many times. And horses know, the beauty of working with them is that being around a horse isn't about, being perfect or being smiley or any of that. It's about being authentic. And so what I teach is when someone is very afraid, the first step is acknowledging that.
Yeah.
When you know yourself and you acknowledge it, that's when a horse feels safe. If you're smiling and you're, petrified, that's incongruent.
Yeah.
That's incongruent energy. And so that doesn't feel safe.
And horses are just so sensitive, aren't they?
Very, very sensitive, yeah. And because they're so present, they're assessing everything constantly, not only in the immediate environment, but out to the horizon. Yeah.
Wow. And so how long have you been doing that work, Christine?
That work I've been doing since 2009. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly... I will tell you. It's a unique way of working with people, for sure.
Yeah. I have found it. I had a coaching practice for many years before I started working with the horses, and I am just in love with it. I just feel so privileged in that space. It's so sacred and so profound. I'm really grateful to be doing it.
Well, so it's interesting because that makes me think you're really sort of nurturing women in that way and working with them in that way to access that sort of mothering and caring quality within themselves, I guess, too.
Oh, absolutely. That can be part of it. Everybody's in a different space on that journey or what they want to do with that or how they want to be with that. But it's absolutely a space for that.
Yeah, and then also I was really interested to read about the work that you do with people about leaving a legacy, which I guess, ties in beautifully with, especially if you're not leaving a legacy in the traditional sense of having children to carry your name and your genes forward so that you can leave a legacy in another way.
Yeah, it's a really great question, Michelle, because I've thought about this so much. And when I was going through, moving through my acceptance of not having a child and questioning, does this mean, am I going to miss the meaning of life? I mean, I have asked every question. I have had my dark spaces, know. And one thing I wanted to be really conscious of is that we do not have to leave or create a profound legacy because we do not have a genetic legacy.
Yeah.
However, I am very much in love with that part of life And my definition of legacy is more around people tapping into what is authentic for them, what they love to do, how they've interacted and impacted people or their own lives, often in ways that they're not even acknowledging or conscious that they are doing. And when you can do that in a way that you can share that with whether it's one other person or a million or serve other people, to me, that is legacy.
Yeah.
It can be creating a vibration of words every day intentionally that you send out, to building a nonprofit that serves girls in leadership. The gamut, I think that word has become so contrived, our limited interpretation of what legacy is, that it's very profound and philanthropic, and it can be. But I think that we're all here to leave a legacy, with or without children, or because we have them or don't. I think it's really finding that essence in yourself and how you're going to breathe that vibration into the world and name it and do it consciously.
Absolutely. And just, standing very clear in your own truth and what's right for you, whether you're a mother or not. It's like everyone's life is equally valid.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that I've been looking at during, this process of really researching and looking and speaking to so many amazing women like yourself is I've been looking at a lot of the myths that exist. And so one of the myths that comes up is, you've not experienced real love, or, you can't really relate until you've had a child and experienced that type of love. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts?
Where do I begin? Yes, this is part of what really drove me to write about this, is because, reclaiming that maternal space, number one, but also that we are whole beings, and whatever our experience of love is, or our greatest experience of love, is our greatest experience of love.
Yeah.
And I really think that these myths and these sayings and these very, boxed expressions of proposed fact, if you will.
Yeah.
I think they're there to support social construct.
Yes.
I think it's for the underlying balance of fear, taking what is not perceived as quote unquote normal and separating, and also the lack of disclosure or full disclosure around what parenting really is. Mm-hmm. And what that experience is. It is not all gumballs and rainbows.
Oh, no.
And so I think it traps women, or, in the other direction as well. I mean, I don't think women in general benefit from this. However, it's a great divider of women as well. When the language is absolute, there's no love in the world there is no, no one except your mother does A, B, C, D. Those are things that I think really, as I said, are to hold that social construct and those systemic things in place, and they're reinforced constantly. I think if we really stop and think about it, both as mothers and non-mothers, what that is doing to us, the pressures that it is putting on women who are mothers, and the division that it's creating for us, I think we can all begin to acknowledge the greater disservice and to, reclaim language and ritual around it that is something meaningful and that has a greater breadth that serves us.
Yes, so true. And I mean, we really, it would be wonderful to try and bridge this gap, because it's, like you say, the language and the constructs, it almost sets up a sense of competitiveness.
Yeah.
Whereas, there's not really any competition. There's only ever, and there's no right or wrong, there's only ever what's right for that individual and for that person. And this whole kind of over-celebration of the mythology of motherhood, in a sense, You know, we don't get a true depiction of the reality of being a parent and how hard it is and challenging it is. Often we see like this Hollywood version, which is really not fair. And nobody can live up to that.
No.
You know, so you can understand why, it's almost interesting, actually. One thing that I did a few months ago was I just put as an experiment in Google, I wish I'd never had a child, to see what came up. Now, I was gobsmacked at the number of forums and sites dedicated to people who said, I wish I'd never had children. And I thought, you know, most of these comments and things were anonymous because people do not feel able to be honest in admitting something like that so publicly because of the stigma that would exist. You know, can you imagine the backlash? So I thought, wow, you know, this is really interesting. But again, I would say that some of that comes from the fact that, of course, the reality of parenthood is not something that you could imagine or prepare for until you're actually experiencing it. You know, the highs, the lows, the joy in that, of course, which I'm sure is very intense, and then the difficulties and the sleep deprivation, you know, and all of that, very intense.
Yeah, and I would never claim someone else's experience, whether that's motherhood or something else.
Yeah.
Or defining that. I do think that another point to this conversation is that the ideals that we try to hold mothers to, you know, what is that saying about womanhood? I think there's so much force toward kind of losing our womanhood, if you will, to motherhood, that it's very curious to me where that conversation goes. You know, the pressures are this end-all, be-all, giving being or vessel, and, you know, where does she go in that process? And I think it's very hard. You know, the women that I know and love and admire as mothers, they're so conscious and they've worked really hard, you know, to be themselves, to actualize in that way, and to be very conscious mothers. And I think they're just beautiful, incredible role models. But they're living in a really keen awareness to be able to do that.
It's fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see how this sort of topic unfolds over the next few years, I feel, because at the moment, like, we're still kind of percolating away with all this, but you can really see it's really about the evolution of women and what they choose for themselves, how we all relate and connect and support each other and come together as a collective, I feel, in supporting all women's choices.
And I would love to see the conversation bridge such that we can diffuse so much of this shame that is in all of these spaces, you know, motherhood or not having children. I think that not only does it keep us in a space of judgment and separation, but it takes our energy and contribution as women collectively.
Yeah. So it's just, look, it's fascinating. Really interesting. And I also had a look at, the definition of the verb to mother and the different meanings of that. And a couple of the things that jumped out at me, which I've kind of mentioned this to each person I spoke to just to get their thoughts, was, you know, it means to give rise to or to produce. Mm-hmm. So again, you know, it gives it that kind of broader context that we're all producing and creating in different ways and creating and expressing different parts of ourselves every day and every moment, really. So what do you feel that you're producing or want to produce that's creating meaning for your life?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think this is the space that, you know, through the grief and the process of coming to acceptance of not having a child when you wanted one, this is the space that we can re-acknowledge women and be able to not only heal but compassionately witness each other and honor and celebrate each other moving forward. For me, there are many things that I want to create, tangible things, in terms of, with the Mother Within space, I really want to see that as a Humans of New York, profiles of what we are doing and who we're being as these expressions. I would love to create a documentary. They're really tangible things. But when I look at what is my greatest work, I really think it's always in terms of who are we being and who are we becoming at any moment in life.
Yeah.
And I feel that I am always working to live a very conscientious life, and wanting to continue to evolve, and in what I'm learning to share that and to do that in service of other beings, as well as the environment, the animal beings that I partner with. And to me, how I can carry myself in that, to me, is really a great contribution for any of us to do.
Beautiful. And so, Christine, do you have any kind of role models, women that you admire, that you look up to, that are child-free or childless at all?
It's such a great question, because I know, it's such an important thing to have role models. And I've thought about this so much in moving forward with my own work around this. And I think, gosh, is it that I admire somebody or that their importance in my life or reflection is because they are childless or child-free? And I think it's not so much that in terms of naming somebody based on that. For me, right now, where my inspiration lies, it is with, Jody Day leading Gateway Women, writing her story, with Karen Malone Wright of Not Mom, you and your work that you're doing. It's the people who are becoming visible to create this conversation for a more feasible and creative and spiritual and loving life for those of us who are these maternal beings, or even if we are child-free and don't have, live in that kind of maternal space, but that we can be free as women to be our whole selves and be acknowledged as our whole selves, regardless of that status or choice or circumstance. And so right now, that's the space that I feel very strongly in, and where my admiration and inspiration lies.
Perfect. I love that. And that's so true, isn't it? We just want to really encourage each other to be our best selves.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thank you, Christine. That's beautiful. And I really hope to get to one of your retreats one day. I was like, oh, wow. When I read that, I thought I really have to get to that next year.
Yes, and I might come your direction.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, thank you so much. And thanks so much for your time and sharing your thoughts. And I'll also include the link to the Mother Within book as well in a blog post that goes with this, so that people can check that out and more of your work.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Unclassified Woman.